members attending in person to respond by saying here when I call your name. I want to remind you to unmute your microphones by pushing the button on the base prior to responding. Ryan Rossi,
Here.
Lily Charlotte Landstrom,
Here.
Aquanet Tyson Thomas, Kate Layden,
Here.
James Garvin,
Here.
Paula Ryan is excused. Jim Knight,
Here.
BJ Mishra is excused. Myron Uman,
Here.
Brian Rosen,
Here.
Greg Fagan,
Here.
James McCormick,
Here.
Albert Richwagon is excused. Wen Deng.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Ruth. All right, are there any modifications to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
I need a motion. Are there any changes to the minutes? If not, can I please have a motion to adopt the minutes as presented? Any changes? Seeing none. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? All right, moving on.
I'm sorry, Chair. Can you clarify who made the motion, who made the second?
Motion was Jim, second was Ryan.
Thank you.
All right. Instructions on how to provide public comment are included in the agenda. Staff, have any general comments been received?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you very much. As a reminder, for action items on the agenda, there are conflict of interest forms available if needed. At this time, I want to invite any CAC member comments for items not already on the agenda. Ready? Yes, Myron.
I just note that we have 14 members and 7 vacancies. And the vacancies are pretty disappointing. Is there anything that the staff can do to encourage the board members who have the opportunity to appoint new members to this committee to do so? Thank you.
And Chair, I can respond if you'd like.
Please do.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Yes, that's a good question, Myron. We do, when we get vacancies like this, Valerie Nielsen, our director, reaches out to them, and when they have their one-on-ones, and even through email, we look for some new members. There's a few in the works right now, so we should be able to have a few filled by this coming meeting, if not at the beginning of the year. So I think we have a few on the way, but we do reach out specifically to those members to try to fill those vacancies.
And is anything being done to, when new members are being considered for appointment, consideration of the requirement that we have representation from various communities and business interests and so forth?
Yeah, that's noted when the director reaches out, like the sort of type of makeup we are trying to meet for CAC members and what they should reflect for citizenry. So it is mentioned, just like how we have it worded in our operating procedures. It's sort of the same language we use.
Just tell them that we got enough old people.
Thank you, Myron. When did you have a comment?
Yeah, I actually had the same comment as Myron. There's a lot of vacancy and it's some of these positions has been vacant for over a year.
Jim?
Finicky today, or it's me. My finger's bad today. Who knows? Anyhow, we were talking about a little bit before the meeting started in the 1 cent sales tax for transportation, so forth. Is that something that they're still working on? Or are they going to work on? And like they have in Broward and Dade County, Brian was talking about earlier. And so I'm just curious if there's any push in here in Palm Beach County to do that.
I was just say that, there is an infrastructure surtax that's going to sunset at the end of this, probably next year or at the end of this year. And then the county has chosen not to renew that one, with some of the discussion being maybe they'll head towards potentially a transportation surtax at the county level. So there are discussions ongoing in relation to that. And so that's sort of an update on that. On TPA side, we do have, Brian, can you read that? We do have this long-range transportation plan, which did see a lot of call for projects and needs, and you'll see there's a lot of unfunded needs. So there are, opportunities out there to figure out new revenue sources to try to get those implemented. And a surtax is obviously one of those. Brian, I'm not sure if there's any other additional conversations you're having that you've heard of regarding that.
I would venture to guess that the current status is that Palm Beach County and the cities, through a couple of interdisciplinary bodies that they have established for resolving planning matters, are working towards the development of a overall transportation plan for the Palm Beach County. That will identify project needs and funding sources. So while that is an option out there for 1 cent, half cent, what have you, charter transportation sales tax, the overall need is to go beyond, obviously, the bounds of what the TBA can produce in terms of a transportation plan for everyone in Palm Beach County. Our federal aid eligible network only makes up less than a fifth of the roadways in Palm Beach County and doesn't really capture all the needs. So once that plan's developed, the county and the cities will be able to identify the appropriate revenue sources for that, which could include transportation sales, related sales tax.
Thank you.
Aquanet.
So I'm just going back to the advisory board and all the vacancies. So just in regards to the executive board, have they had discussions around this? Because to Myron's point, these vacancies has been vacant for some time and there's individuals, like, for example, Belglade, yes, the distance. However, is it something where they can join virtually, right? Make accommodations? Have you brought up having some type of campaign? All right, so Riviera, Royal Palm, Wellington, sorry, not Wellington, in the city of West Palm Beach is huge, where we have two. But just having a conversation with the executive board, we should have, there shouldn't be this many vacancies. If you have, is everyone represented on the executive board, all the cities here? So is there representation for every vacancy on the executive board?
Correct. That's how it's set up. Our structure is every board member has one representative on the CAC.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's something I would recommend that they work on, have some type of campaign or whatnot, So we just need to do better here. They, need to put in some more effort or around it or, advise their city manager or whomever. So put out a call for volunteers or whatnot. That's just my
Campaign.
2 cents there.
Thank you, Aquanet. Any other comments? Maybe you good?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Nope. All right. Thank you all. So we're gonna move on to liaisons report. I invite Andrew to provide an update. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. So there's a few items on here. I'll start with some items that aren't going to be on here. So what you're seeing on the agenda today is this one item. It's an informational item. It's the long range transportation plan. After this, we will not have a November meeting. And then the December meeting should be a really good one. You'll see the long range transportation plan adoption. There'll also be the draft tentative work program. So the upcoming 5 years that feeds into our tip. And then you'll also see the Tri-Rail Transit Development Plan. So what they're doing over the next 10 years. So it should be a pretty good agenda for December. And again, this one's going to be focused with the consultants on the LRTP. And so the items we have for you in the laser report, the printout, it's available online as well after this meeting. But the first one's the 2055 Florida Transportation Plan. We brought this up last time. They had one in-person meeting in our area. They still have some virtual open house through October 4th. There's also some committees that people can serve on. And there's a survey. So if you want to get more involved in that, it's on the website. The way that relates to us is this is a statewide visioning exercise, right? Setting the overarching goals for Florida and transportation. This then feeds their policy documents and it feeds their ultimately how they're implementing projects and prioritizing projects. So it all starts from this plan. Next is Ride, Roll, Stroll Challenge. So this is occurring October 1st to November 2nd. And you can sign up at riderollstroll.com. We're participating along with other metropolitan planning organizations throughout the nation, and so, yes, throughout the nation. And we're sort of in competition with them. So if you want to get signed up for that, it's riderollstroll.com. There's a walk and roll to school day. It's going to be 28th of annual one, and it's going to be on October 9th. And so there's going to be some participating schools, and you can find out more information on the website. We'll be hosting workshops for our LRTP. So you'll be seeing the overall presentation today. But next week, we have an in-person workshop that's going to get more into the details with maps and boards. There's also going to be a virtual version of that on October 11th. So that's going to be on a Friday morning. After that, we're opening up our funding program for municipalities and the county and others to apply. It's our Transportation Alternatives Program. And we're going to have a workshop on that. That's one of those competitive application processes we have where there's a maximum of money available for each project, $1.5 million, but we're hosting a workshop for our partners. Next is Mobility Week for 2024. This is hosted by FDOT. It's going to be that entire week from October 25th to the 2nd. There's most likely going to be some events throughout the county for different municipalities, but also FDOT hosts a lot of the events. During that, we actually have our own bike ride in partnership with the City of West Palm Beach. And so we're going to do a bike ride down here at 8:30 on the 25th. And then for Safe Streets Summit, this is an annual summit we host on safety. And there's a different theme every year. And this one's actually being hosted by us this year. It's in partnership with Broward, MPO, the Miami-Dade, TPO, and ourselves, the TPA. And so this year it's going to be downtown West Palm Beach at the Hilton. And then other than that, the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, which is going on with its partners as well, is still being updated with adoption into next year. And other ones are just some other resources with our newsletter and some grant tools.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any public comments on this item?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ruth. Do any of the committee members have any comments or questions about the liaisons report? Seeing none. We're going to move on to an informational item as there are no action items on the agenda for this month. So I invite Andrew Euler, Deputy Director of Programs, to present on the item of the 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan draft.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have our consultant here, Stuart Robertson with Kimley Horn. He's going to present on this item. He's going to do a pretty good job, I think, with an overview and getting into sort of the process that we've gotten to in this point. It is a large document. There's hundreds of projects in it, and we want to make sure it's something that's understandable for everyone. So when you do have a chance, if you haven't yet, to go through it, we'd love your feedback. If there's anything that we can change to make it more understandable, we want to hear that. So it's supposed to be a living document and something that people can really use as a tool as we prioritize projects into our TIP.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Citizens Advisory Committee. My name is Stuart Robertson with Kimley Horn. We have been supporting the TPA and its stakeholder agencies on the development of the 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan. The LRTP is the beginning of a project's journey toward completion within the federal and state funding process for transportation. The LRTP is a living document in the sense that it is updated through a major update every 5 years, but there is the opportunity to provide amendments to an adopted LRTP within those 5 years, whenever a project presents itself that would be necessary for this type of an amendment. The project covers all federal and state requirements for urbanized transportation area planning processes and the identification of projects to go into eventually the TPA's Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. It is required for receiving federal and state transportation funding and is the pipeline for identifying the projects that will ultimately move from the long-range transportation planning phase into the TIP, which is the 5-year work program for the TPA. So the TPA's 2050 LRTP has been an 18-month public process. It began in the summer of 2023 with a goal-setting phase. This is where the TPA identified the goals, objectives, and performance measures that help to inform the prioritization process, but also will identify the procedures by which the TPA measures success toward the implementation of the projects identified in the plans. There was a call for projects process in the fall of 2023, which went out to all local governments in Palm Beach County to identify and submit projects through the TPA's Call for Projects portal for inclusion within the local desires component of the LRTP. Then in the winter of 2023, there was a technical needs assessment, which identified projects that would help serve the mobility needs of all modes of transportation for the plan. And then in the spring of 2024, there was a scenario planning process in which we evaluated those needs through a travel demand modeling exercise. Then in the summer of 2024, the budgeting and implementation phase, which identified the draft cost feasible plan. And now as we are moving toward the final plan adoption in December of 2024, we're pleased to present the draft documentation at this meeting. Each of these phases has been accompanied by public workshops and the opportunity for input online for the plan. And I'll speak to that in more detail on a future slide. So in any good transportation plan, it's important to understand the boundary or the limits of what we are studying. And this slide shows maps that include the urban area boundary as identified by the 2020 United States Census. The TPA does plan for the entirety of Palm Beach County, but it receives funding to apply to the urban area boundary, which is shown as the shape on this map. You'll also see two different magenta lines on this map, which shows the federal aid network. Those are the roadways by which the TPA is able to apply federal funding for roadways. These include roads that are not necessarily all on the federal network, but may include some local major roadways as well. So the public outreach that the TPA has conducted includes both a high touch and a high tech component. There have been in-person meetings, 18 public workshops were held, outreach presentations to local agencies and stakeholder meetings with individual agencies for helping them and supporting them in developing project submittals. There's also been the high-tech component, which has included an online survey, a statistically significant survey that was conducted of Palm Beach County residents. I'll speak to the results of that in a moment. Also, a public comment map that was available online for anyone to go to the TPA's website and add ideas to be included and to help inform the plan. And an online project map as the various projects were identified and developed through the phases of the LRTP. People could view the development of the plan online with this online project map. So speaking to the survey results, there are several top priorities that were identified. The surveys included community goals, but also transportation goals. There were two different surveys that the TPA conducted. One was a statistically significant random sample survey. And the results of that are shown on the top half of this slide. The top priorities identified by the community in that survey were providing more housing that is affordable and managing the county's growth and development. In addition, the random sample statistically significant survey identified transportation priorities in addition to the overall community goals. The number one transportation priority identified by the public in this survey was addressing traffic congestion, followed by expanding service for people who are economically disadvantaged, and then third was safety. You've seen several presentations on the goals, objectives, and performance measures throughout the development of this 2050 LRTP. So I'll just briefly mention and remind you that the goals that have been established are safe, efficient, connected, multimodal, and resilient. Each of the projects will fit into one of those 5 goals, and each of those goals have specific objectives and performance measures that will help the TPA evaluate their performance in implementing the projects in the long-range transportation plan. There's good news related to federal performance targets in that these performance targets have gotten more stringent in recent years, identifying targets that have higher percentages of roadways that are in good compliance with transportation objectives. And the TPA has been an influential voice at the state level in helping to modify these performance targets to be more stringent. So these are the performance targets that the TPA will use in the coming years to be able to identify the progress toward the goal of implementing the projects in the LRTP and be able to report to its advisory committees, such as you all, as well as the governing board on the progress in achieving the projects identified in the LRTP. So now we'll move in toward the identification of the projects in the 2050 LRTP. Last fall, there was a call for projects process that was conducted by the TPA. This encouraged local government partners to submit projects for inclusion within the plan. The TPA received 1,370 projects. So there's a lot of needs that our local governments have in Palm Beach County. The TPA worked to prioritize these projects that align with the goals, objectives, and performance measures that were established in this plan last fall. The TPA also conducted a needs analysis that included additional identification of projects that would support needs for multimodal transportation. So everything from people driving in cars to people walking, biking, freight movements, but also looking into things such as maintenance, resiliency, emerging technologies. All of these aspects were incorporated into the needs analysis of project identification. So moving from the needs analysis into the prioritization process, the process was established consistent with the goals, objectives, and performance measures. So all of the transportation needs that were identified in the multimodal needs analysis, as well as all of the project desires that were submitted by local governments, went through the project screening process and resulted in the placement of each of these projects into 3 buckets. So first is the cost feasible projects. These are projects that are expected to have revenue available and ranked highly enough within the goals process to be considered cost feasible to be built by 2050 with either federal or state transportation dollars, not with local dollars, but federal or state dollars. The second bucket are the illustrative projects. These are projects that are consistent with the TPA's goals and are eligible for funding, but there may not be enough funds available from anticipated revenue sources to build them. We may be able to get funding through discretionary grants to build them, but are considered to be illustrative at this time based on the dollars that are anticipated to be available within the LRTP. And then the third bucket are local desires, which are projects that are currently ineligible to receive federal or state funding, but have been submitted through the process by local governments. This slide presents the revenue projections in millions of dollars that the TPA has identified through state and federal transportation funding processes. So every LRTP starts on day 1 of the TIP. So our current LRTP begins on July 1st, 2024, because that's the beginning of fiscal year 25. So the TPA's adopted fiscal year 25 through fiscal year 29 tip are the first 5 years of the LRTP. So that's documented within the plan. But the LRTP goes beyond that to a 25-year planning horizon using revenue or transportation dollars that are anticipated to be available. So not programmed yet, but anticipated to be available from known federal or state transportation funding sources. So those are the outer years or groups of years within the LRTP. It starts with 2030. It goes through 2050. Now you may look at this table and ask, why is 2030 by itself? And why are the other years in 5 or 10-year bands? And this is because the LRTP is required to go through fiscal year 2050. The tip runs from fiscal year 25 through fiscal year 29. So 30 through 50 is actually 21 fiscal years. So we group 2030 by itself. That would be the 6th year, the first year beyond the currently adopted tip. The other 20 years are grouped together based on federal guidelines. So the US DOT tells us to group your first 5 years, your second 5 years into 5-year bands. And then for your outer years, which is when we've got a little bit more of a hazy, cloudy view of what might be happening, because of that unknown aspect of the outer years, the MPOs within the country group those years into a 10-year final band. So that's why we have 2030 as one single year. You can think of that as the 6th year of the work program, or the new first year when we get to the work program phase later in this fiscal year. Then we have a 5-year band from 31 to 35, another 5-year band from 36 to 40, and finally a 10-year outer window from 41 to 50. Each MPO in the country updates its LRTP every 5 years. So this is not the plan that will take us necessarily all the way to 2050, because in the year 2029, the TPA will be here presenting to you its updated 2055 LRTP. So there will be a chance to update the project with new information related to revenue, new projects, potentially unknowns or new technologies that are available 5 years from now that are not available now. That's why we call the LRTP a continuous update in a living document. So in terms of the individual dollars, the TPA, based on our coordination with the State Department of Transportation Revenue Estimates Office, is anticipated to be looking at something like $870 million in TPA attributable dollars by 2050. So that's kind of our budget, if you will, of all of the needs and all of the desires that we received and that we analyzed. The budget is $870 million. But we also looked at what the FDOT is looking at being able to build through its Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS, Florida's Turnpike Enterprise, the money that's anticipated to be available from state and regional discretionary programs, and then finally, the money that's anticipated to be available from the state through its maintenance program. These could be things like resurfacing projects. And the resurfacing program that FDOT administers has actually been a good opportunity to get modifications made to the transportation system that support bicycle mobility, better sidewalks, ADA facilities, bus stop improvements. We're able to get those type of improvements into FDOT resurfacing programs. And also the LRTP is required to show that we are able to maintain the system that we already have before expanding on that into additional capacity improvements. So that is why the operations and maintenance phase is shown in the LRTP. So this slide shows a little more detail on the various buckets of projects within the LRTP. So on the left column of this slide, the cost feasible bucket, are projects that are identified to be funded with federal or state funding. But they may also include phases of certain projects, like major transportation investments that are not fully funded. So for example, a major investment such as rail in the US 27 corridor may have a PD&E phase funded in the cost feasible plan, even if the cost feasible plan does not identify dollars that could fully implement the project. The next bucket are the illustrative projects. These are projects that are consistent with the TPA's goals and objectives, but are just unfunded in the sense that we don't anticipate that revenue would be available to implement all of the TPA's desires by 2050. However, projects in the illustrative bucket may be funded and completed well before 2050 if they receive funding from other sources, like grant programs or discretionary programs that we know are available, but we don't know for sure that we're going to be receiving those fundings. And then finally, the third bucket are the other local desires. These are local projects that are either not eligible for state and federal funding or do not meet the TPA's criteria for demonstrating planning consistency with TPA or federal goals. So this slide presents some of the information of projects that are new to Vision 2050. New to Vision 2050 means we're not included in the 2045 long-range transportation plan that was adopted 5 years ago. So there has been a refined active transportation network that has provided more detailed information on high-priority pedestrian and bicycle projects. Mobility on demand zones have been added to Vision 2050 LRTP. Planning for express bus routes through coordination with PalmTran and FDOT. Short and long-term transit implementation strategies, looking at shorter-term implementation in advance of longer-term major transit investment. Intelligent transportation with transit signal priority, working together with PalmTran and Palm Beach County on this strategy. The freight element of the LRTP has been identified through identifying freight activity areas and documenting those in the LRTP. We now have mapped the electric and alternative fuel corridors for investment. Local complete streets projects have been included, even those that are off of the federal aid highway network. And then finally, the identification of feasibility studies. Examples of these include the State Road A1A resiliency study on Singer Island, the US 27 rail feasibility study, which I mentioned earlier, a complete street study on Avenue A in Belgrade, and studies to advance the 561 transit plan corridors. So another one of those where we may have cost feasible aspects of the project as feasibility studies or environmental studies before leading to the full implementation. So I think this slide is important to talk about how projects are developed and go from initial idea all the way through funded in the Transportation Improvement Program. So the initial phase is project development on the left in the blue column. This is where we are today, where projects are selected from the LRTP for advancement into subsequent phases. A project may move from being identified in the LRTP onto the TPA's adopted list of priority projects, or LOPP. This is the document that communicates to FDOT what the TPA priorities are for imminent rounds of new work programs. So once a project has been identified by the TPA and the LOPP, it moves into the draft tentative work program of FDOT. This is where FDOT provides a draft of the work program for the TPA committees and governing board review. And then finally, a project would move from the draft tentative work program into the adopted Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. This is the 5-year work program at the end of the project's life cycle, journeying from initial identification in the LRTP all the way through full funding within the TIP. So that would be what's coming up for the projects identified in the LRTP. So as we wrap up the presentation phase here, just wanted to note some important dates for the LRTP. The committee presentations that are happening today and tomorrow this week. We've also got a presentation scheduled on the governing board agenda next Thursday, October 10th. And then that same afternoon, we will be conducting a public workshop of the draft LRTP. For those that are able to attend in person, it's going to be right here in this room. We will also be conducting the workshop as a virtual option on the following day, Friday, October 11th, for those that may not be able to make it here in person. Then once those workshops and presentations are concluded, we'll have 2 weeks to address any additional comments that we receive through this process by October 25th in order for us to submit our final draft of the 2050 LRTP to state and federal review agencies to begin the required 45-day review period. Then in December, we will be coming back to the committees and the governing board for recommendation for adoption of this plan. We also invite any individual meetings that you may want to have for your local municipality or district that you represent. We're happy to schedule one-on-one meetings with you to go over individual aspects of the plan that you may have questions about. TPA staff and the consultant team are open for those meetings, and we would like to have those wrapped up before the October 25th submittal to the state and federal review agencies. So that wraps up my presentation, and I would be happy to address any questions or comments that you may have on the draft 2050 LRTP.
No, Mr. Chair.
I'll always have a question. Thank you. So really an excellent presentation of the process, and it was very helpful. Can you describe for us, say, 5 things that are going to be in the 2050 plan that we should know about right now?
Yeah, I would be
That are
happy
not- that are
to
not already in the 2045.
give my opinion on that. And
Yes.
would invite TPA staff to comment on that as
I
well.
mean, we need to get some substance.
Yeah, so all of the substance definitely is in the draft report that is available for review. But I would think what I would want to mention would be looking at technology solutions and the potential for funding of electric vehicle charging stations is one thing. Secondly, continuing to support local complete streets projects, adding pedestrian and bicycle mobility aspects and safety aspects for people walking and biking on local projects. Thirdly, the investment in identifying transit solutions on our major corridors. The TPA is working with FDOT to advance the Okeechobee Boulevard Transit Solution Project. And then fourthly, I'll do 4 of the 5, and maybe TPA can give their own input as well. Helping to support with filling in the gap of the roadway network, roadway grid network by supporting some of the projects that fill in that gap. Looking at things like extending roadways over limited access expressways to provide local access without folks having to go through an interchange to get from one side of the limited access roadway to another. So those were some of the takeaways that I had from what ranked highly within the needs analysis. Andrew and TPA staff, if you all maybe had some other takeaways as well, because there's a lot of good stuff in the plan.
Yep, thank you, Stuart. And it's a good question. And to expand on what Stuart's points were there, and I'll have Brian Ruscher, our Deputy Director of Multimodal, talk a little bit more about how it plays out on the transit side, because I think that's a big component of it. We do have a lot of products in here that we have identified the corridors for those smart traffic signal technologies. And we really are starting to prioritize those along our major transit routes, but not just having transit signal priority out there, but also that allows for other smart traffic control systems that have it for obviously our emergency evacuation, our major national highway system. So we're really trying to prioritize those corridors for infrastructure investments. And there's a lot of signals out there. A lot of it might require moving the signals or the mast arms. So those are big infrastructure investments that are cost feasible. Many of those are in the plan. And then to expand on that, we do have a lot of products that were submitted by locals that were some really some good ideas that would make a difference. Many of those will need some feasibility studies first before we fully bring them into the plan. So the way those are going to be handled is you might see in the plan the feasibility study for something like Boca Raton might have a few above grade or pedestrian bridges in certain locations to get across some of these major facilities like 95. We have in a few of those. There's other grade separations for the rail lines that had been concepts in the strategic intermodal system for a while. Many of those probably wouldn't move forward long term, but maybe look at the ones that might move forward. We have some feasibility studies in there for resiliency. For example, A1A in Singer Island, which is another one that requires some more feasibility analysis. So I would say there's a lot of feasibility studies coming up in a lot of those sections. Technology is a big focus. And then we are getting a lot of complete streets products for these communities, which tend to be larger scale ones than we've typically seen in our annual application process. And then lastly, there is that more detail when it comes to the transit system and really getting into the short-term and long-term investments. And so you're starting to see additional work on transit system prioritization, shelters, and a few other items. Brian, did you want to expand upon that?
Yes.
Great.
So the 2045 LRTP did a really great job at identifying the premium corridors and what the kind of service could be. This LRTP provides a roadmap to getting there. And I think it breaks it up into two ways. One is short term, and then the second is long term. Short term, we know we have really inefficient routes. We have services which aren't meeting the demands of transit users that are there now. And more or less, we have a really good system once you're on the system, but getting to the system is not great. So for the short-term time frame, we know that we need to readdress some of our poorly performing transit services, take that money, reinvest it into really short headways for buses. So for example, we just increased the frequency through Palm Tran on route number 3 from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. Since that launch at the beginning of September, excluding the storm days, there's been a 40% jump in ridership. That's on top of the already 30% in ridership just from the past year without any service improvements. And I challenge any of you to go walk, drive, bike, what have you, military trail, look for transit shelters. You probably won't find very many, but there are a lot of transit stops, one every 500 to 800 feet. So there is a strong demand for transit, and we see that along many of our lines. Now, once we start looking at increasing those headways to times like 15 minutes and otherwise, and we start putting, our plan is for about 50 shelters a year using a combination of our funds and other federal funds available, that's when we're really going to start seeing some magic happen in terms of transit ridership, which will get us to a longer term recommendation and ultimately a larger match that could come down from the federal government if we have the long-term operating cap contributions. So we have now in the 2050 plan a framework for how we're going to build that ridership and get to a premium transit service that will be much closer to what Miami-Dade and Broward County have and are working towards.
Thank you. All three responses were helpful. Now, I have a follow-up question. What about the airports, the port, and freight? We always talk about roads,
Mhm.
but we 50 years out or 25 years out for the airports and the port. I mean, there could be significant developments. So what's in the LRTP for that?
Sure. We typically in this plan, you're going to see ports and airports in a separate section, but it is one that is supported by the TPA. So it's considered like a illustrative in that nature. meaning that if they're gonna, because they're already going after federal and state grants, but they're ones that are supported to go after those in the future. And they were built off of the master plans of both of those major partners. So it's the airport master plan and the ports master plans that were incorporated into this document. And so there's a lot of larger scale products in there. And when they're seeking certain grants, we'll show those supports. And there might be some items in there that we'll look through and see if there's other ways to maybe implement it faster with some of the funding that we have available. Because there's opportunities with that. So that's what we have for those. For freight, the state submitted some products in the call for products when it came to truck parking. And you'll see a few of those. And then we look into sort of the freight plans we have at the state level to sort of pull from that. And then also in there is this freight activity areas, which was done in our district for FDOT. And that's noted in the plan. And that's more about designation of certain locations that might be for greater prioritization of freight funds at the state level. And so that's more of a policy designation rather than the national project, but that's also new to the plan. Not sure there's anything else we wanted to mention. Oh, and there's a feasibility study on US 27. Long-term, there's a major CIS project. Potentially, there's two projects that are identified. There's one on US 27 for more truck lanes. And there's also a potential for rail freight. And we'll be most likely exploring those options pretty soon here in the next few years with the feasibility study with our partners, because that goes all the way down to Miami.
And the purpose and intent of that is to relieve freight traffic off of I-95.
Right, we've talked about rail on 20, that rail
27, yeah.
project for years. It was originally part of the inland port notion. But we're not talking about inland port anymore, is that right?
It's a good follow-up question. We had that US 27 connector feasibility study, which is another project that consultants from FDOT came and presented on a few months ago. It sort of has some conversations still. I don't know the current status of that one though.
Thank you, Myron. Thank you. Wynn? Oh, yes, Brian.
One thing I was gonna ask, I did review the, 73 page LR.
Oh.
Turn your mic,
I'll
please.
apologize, Brian. Would you mind using the mic? There you go.
I did go through the document, and again, it was really helpful, and a lot of the meat is in the document because it literally lays out and, the definitions. Appreciate you walking us through it, each of the areas and all the different programs. My question was just for my own looking at stuff. Are you able to share something like that in like a CSV or XLS type file so that I can organize it by cities or this or that, just because it's all in like that PDF and it is a lot of information to kind of go through.
Sure, we can do that. That's a good suggestion.
All right. And then again, you can share with everyone because then it just really has it all, like the meat of it, where everyone can see every single project and kind of where it's categorized. And then it's off subject to this, but real quick, I was just maybe toward the end of the meeting, I'd like to little follow up on the Delray Beach walkthrough we did. I know I had some stuff and just kind of want to track that, but that's.
Brian Rusher, Deputy for Multimodal, I just sent staff the draft for potentially going to commission next week, I believe, or the week after. So if you'd like, I can give you a preview of that as well as anyone else. I know Wen Dang was also at the walk on it as well.
That'd be great. Yeah, I just love to see the stuff as it moves through. It's great. Appreciate it. Thank you for the update.
Thank you, Brian. Wynn?
Hi, thank you. I'll cut it short, but I have two questions. I have one in particular with all the smart signal upgrades that is being proposed along transit route. Can you give me a little more details on how the county plans to integrate that with, for example, an existing system like the city of Boca?
I spoke with Naresh this morning about the transit signal priority. The city of Boca views it as a priority to make sure that they are also included in those projects. So for example, we're trying to ensure that with the first phase of transit signal priority, that military trail is included, and that is a countywide route for route number 3, the service I just mentioned where their ridership would increase. They would have to install new signal boxes for that to happen, as they've learned through the US1 transit signal priority process. But they are willing to do that in an expedited fashion if the money becomes unlocked for that. So Boca Raton is being coordinated with for TSP specifically for transit and for emergency response. In addition to that, I believe the number was 27 corridor wide transit, or excuse me, 27 corridor wide traffic signal upgrades for smart traffic monitoring and active kind of control. So that was included in the cost feasible plan is what we identified yesterday.
Do you know what system they're moving towards? Is it Centrux? Whatever.
I believe they're still testing.
Testing.
They have a one pilot that's currently going on in Palm Beach Gardens, and I believe that
It's
they
the same
received a
system
state-
as the island.
the
Palm Beach
state
Island.
appropriation for West Palm Beach and
Yep.
military through Flagler is what they're testing right now. And then as the years progress, they'll get more funding for other corridors.
Awesome, thank you. Another question is on the process itself. With the 1,370 projects that was submitted, there, and I did, I frequent the TPA website, as there is an abundance resource.
Thank you.
I probably drive traffic to your website on a daily basis there. But I guess my question is more on the process. For cities who are not as active, as we know that, we have 7 vacancies on this board, as in for those cities who are not active, how do we fill in those gaps for local projects to make it on the LRTP? Or what kind of outreach did we do? more
Sure, we can,
specifically?
and I'll have our consultants or staff follow up as well. We definitely have gaps, right? And that's why we wanted to emphasize this living document. We noticed through this process, obviously, there's a lot of cities who don't even have, the staff or the resources to even have like a mobility plan in place. So we would like to partner with them. One example recently that actually made into the plan is when we were coordinating with Belglade. They had a need now specifically for a product, which is Avenue A, which is one of their main streets in Belglade. TPA is doing that initial feasibility study with them. It's actually going to be by Kimley Horn. And they just had their kickoff meeting on that one. So it's now identified as an illustrative project. With no cost assigned to the product yet, but based on how this feasibility study goes, that's one that we can then push forward potentially into the cost feasible plan and get it done more quickly, even though it doesn't exist in a timeline right now in this LRTP document. And we have other options for those cities if they want to partner and do more mobility plans. So after this one Avenue A, Belglade's also partnering with us for a larger mobility plan for their city. We've done prior ones, I believe, with ITID and a few other jurisdictions. Anything else you wanted to add to that? So that's sort of like,
Yeah.
And as these get finished up, we can always amend them into the plan. And if they're really, viable products to move forward, we can get somebody to build it, we'll get those things done more quickly.
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Wen. It's very important. Avenue A is a good example of the TPA continuously coordinating with local governments, even beyond the call for projects to support them in identifying important needs. The other thing I would mention is the multimodal needs analysis conducted by the consultant team that looked countywide, regardless of the agency's status of either having responded or not to the call for projects. So the multimodal needs analysis is available within the LRTP to fill in any gaps of cities that may not have responded to the call for projects.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a very good point, especially having sit through this process twice now. The such a significant difference from the last plan versus this plan. There's a high emphasis on transit and transit amenities on this plan. And I'd like to say that as a region, we really need it. The last plan, I don't know if you remember, Stuart, but
I
there
do.
were there were interchanges along local streets and there were 3 lanings of bridges. I'm not sure why you need a center turn lane, but we had it on the plan. So I really appreciate this thorough process. And for those board members who's is newer to the process, it's a very lengthy process, but this is a good thing for us. And I think we are moving in the right directions. Thank you.
Thank you, Wynn. On behalf of the team, that means a lot. Thank you.
Any other comments? Myron?
I just have a question. It's my impression that the conversations about signal priority are focused on surface transit, Tran, for example. Is there any thought about extending that technology to emergency vehicles, fire and ambulance, for example? Because when from a public safety perspective, when you see ambulances having to stop every block, be sure that cross traffic has stopped, even though they have a green light because there's a siren on. It would be, if the signal priority technology becomes effective, it would seem to me to be very useful to extend that to fire rescue and because of the nature of the problems that the fire trucks and ambulances have.
It's my understanding, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but the transit signal priority network that they're putting out there is also at the same time going to be available for emergency services. So they'll be able to use that system. Now, I'm not sure if it's like a separate overall system itself, or they're just using the same hardware or what, but from my understanding, they'll both be synced.
Yes, just they will be implemented at the same time. We are able to fund the transit portion of it. That's why we push so much emphasis towards it. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and the emergency vehicle preemption is referred to as level 1 preemption, which is a hard preemption. The transit signal priority, which is referred to as signal 2, is giving priority but not hard preemption to a transit route. So a transit bus wouldn't automatically truncate a red phase for the side street, whereas the emergency vehicle signal preemption could do that. So there's 2 layers of preemption or priority, if you will. Preemption for emergency vehicles and priority for transit vehicles.
And how far in the future is this?
Today, it's available today. It's a software that could be written onto the hardware of the traffic control signal controllers, those metal boxes that you see adjacent to the traffic signals in the county.
And to close out, I guess, maybe the question, the county was testing the procurement on their transit vehicles, which was the final element of their procurement process, was to ensure the system plugged and played well, as Stuart was referring to. So when that occurs, we have enough budget, I believe, for US 1 Okeechobee Boulevard already prioritized and programmed for Palm Tran. They may be able to do additional corridors with the money that they've been allocated based on the cost estimates with the procurement. So we will provide an update once we have more info on that.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? No. Stuart, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. I appreciate being walked through it as methodically as you did. I have a big picture question.
Yes.
So let's just say everything works out wonderfully and all these projects are funded according to what's in the LRTP. How much money do you think we would be actually on the hook for to fund up most of this stuff?
Well, the amount of money that's anticipated to be available from federal and state sources
Yeah.
is around $870 million for TPA priority projects.
Right.
And then there are additional dollars identified from state sources that the FDOT would program those priorities.
Mhm.
The additional projects are unfunded needs. So those unfunded needs or local desires would be implemented either through local sources like a municipality's general fund or the county's road transportation funds or discretionary grants, like maybe an SS4A grant or a build grant or something that's receiving additional funding beyond what we're able to account for in what's anticipated to be available.
And just to ask the question, would those projects have what is the estimated cost that those might be? Or do we just not know yet? Because those still have yet to go through processes.
Yeah, I can answer that. We have, and some of the numbers are being finalized for the unfunded to get those cost estimates
Mhm.
correct. And as we delete some duplicates or refine some of these. So like unfunded needs, right now, let's see here. It looks like overall is about $33 billion in the plan. And that's like Grand Vision, everything that we have in here. For example, I'll say alone the signals we have for unfunded, it's 400 million. And then for signals that are cost feasible right now is around 590 million. And some of these cost estimates are pretty large because and the same for transit, they're large amounts because it sort of has the full suite of like what would go in there. Like for signals along military, which is one of the larger corridors we have here, it expands most of the county. It's got a cost estimate in there for mast arm replacements, new tech, all that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty grand cost to just install the transit signal prioritization with the emergency prioritization. Maybe it won't be that full cost. But yeah, right now I can say about $33 billion in unfunded needs overall.
So you're saying we have a little bit of a gap to fill? No, I just think it's very interesting because we talk about these on an annual basis and in piecemeal. So to understand what really the needs are over the next till 2050 is a very interesting number to look at. Like I said, I've looked through the plan. I thought very comprehensive and a lot of great stuff in there. So conversations about funding will be another day. So thank you, Stuart. I appreciate it. Once again, any final comments or questions? No? All right. Thank you very much. Items 4A through 4D are informational only. There will be no staff presentations unless requested by a committee member. Anybody? No? Are there any public comments on any of these items?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right. I just want to remind everybody that our next meeting is on December 4th, 2024. At this time, the Citizens Advisory Committee is adjourned. Thank you.